Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for tuning in today. It's great to be here with you, sharing a bit about NewsGuard, but also about misinformation online more generally. It's a very nuanced and kind of evolving threat that actually affects all of us, especially now that we're spending more and more time online and consuming more and more information online. So just quickly going through what we plan to cover today. We're going to focus the first half of the session on misinformation more broadly, what it is, how it differs from disinformation, which is a similar but distinct concept, why it's important, particularly in the context of older audiences online, and how you can actually work to protect yourself and avoid it and help family and friends do so as well. The second half of it moves into what we do here at NewsGuard and how we can support you, as well as the opportunity to access our data and our browser extension at no extra cost. So it's provided for free to all attendees. If you're interested, at the very end, we'll walk you through how to download that if you so wish. So let's get right ahead. What is misinformation? It's a buzzword that seems to be, all over the media now, particularly in the last few years, whether that's to do with health misinformation, whether that's to do with election integrity, whether that's to do with the Russia-Ukraine war that rages on, or anything in between. We're seeing misinformation as a prolific problem online, both spread by individual websites that kind of purport to be news websites, but may actually not be, as well as on social media, where there's kind of a greater forum for voices to chime in. Misinformation is defined as false or inaccurate information. This is distinct from disinformation, which is actually based on intent. So technically speaking, if you are a reputable news organization with good practices, you can still accidentally spread misinformation. But as long as you correct your answers and kind of clarify that your mistake was a mistake and that actually this is the right answer and you're transparent about it, misinformation can kind of be understood as unintentional or unwilling for the most part. Disinformation is kind of the real threat, if you like. It's when actors are, bad actors who over and over again are, capitalizing on new opportunities to foster dissent or spread false information, hoaxes, and other forms of harm over and over again. So those are the kind of bad actors that a lot of our work at NewsGuard focuses on. Just for curiosity and out of interest, one of the things that we were noticing when we were doing research around misinformation around the Russia-Ukraine war was that many of the websites that were spreading that misinformation were also the same websites that have in the past spread misinformation about election integrity or misinformation about healthcare and the COVID vaccine, et cetera. So oftentimes we do see on a kind of system level, the same bad actors, the same websites rear their ugly heads over and over again for different topics. And why is it important to be aware of misinformation online? So when we don't know what information we can trust, it can create confusion. And when we have access to inaccurate information, it actually can hamper our ability to understand current affairs and important news. Also, sharing information from sources that we're perhaps not familiar with and that could potentially be untrustworthy or have a hidden agenda can actually put other people at risk. So we saw a lot of this during the pandemic when healthcare advice was being spread online that had actually no scientific backing, and people were taking home remedies into their own hands and actually potentially causing more harm to their health. And finally, we know that large technology companies actually have systems in place to make false information slightly more viral online. So stories that feel more sensational or that trigger certain emotions are actually more prone to spreading. And it means that when these stories are shared, even accidentally, oftentimes, unfortunately, due to the design of the system, they reach more people and can cause more harm. So quickly on why older people specifically are vulnerable to misinformation. Research has found that there are several shares of false information online on platforms like Twitter that can be attributed to older users. This was particularly prevalent around elections, especially in the US. However, we also know that because older generations did not grow up with the 24/7 news cycle and actually were more used to say, picking up the daily paper or pausing before consuming the next amount of content, that oftentimes their instincts are correct when it comes to what feels trustworthy to me on a kind of cognitive heuristic level, and what do I feel like is a little off. So why should we be concerned here? What are the stakes of this issue? First of all, older people are much more likely to be politically active with greater voter turnout in most cases. They're also often targeted in things like online scams and other forms of online deception, including fraud schemes. And spreaders of disinformation can do something really similar, targeting those who they know for a fact make higher stakes health or financial decisions. So how can you work to avoid misinformation in your daily life, in the way that you consume the news, and perhaps in the way that you share and discuss current affairs with others in your communities and networks? First of all, thinking critically about the sources of information that you read. So considering things like, does this media outlet make a distinction between news and opinion, for example, is a great place to start. That's actually one of NewsGuard's criteria, which we'll move into later. But asking yourself, is this an opinion piece? Is this just what someone thinks? Is this a commentator who is offering their 2 cents about something and sharing their point of view? Or is this written and framed like an actual factual reporting piece that is designed to objectively reflect something that's happening in the world right now? Another thing we sometimes see are headlines that are written in a deceptive way that can be designed to shock you, whether that's with all capitals or with lots of exclamation marks, or perhaps with really extreme sentiments that make you think, hold on a minute, is that true? How does that make me feel? And that's actually a really good place to start. Are the headlines I'm reading sounding realistic to me? Do I feel like they're written in a way that's designed to sound controversial or even scare me? Those are great places to start when looking at the integrity and balance of a potential news source that you may not have come across before. Some other habits that we at NewsGuard think are really helpful for everyone when reading the news online and being a more discerning news consumer is being confident about source credibility. So lateral reading is a tactic that essentially means when you are reading an article from the news website that you frequent, for example, I love reading the FT, the Financial Times, for business news. It means that at the same time as I'm reading an FT article, I'm also on the side, if I wasn't sure about the FT or didn't know what it was, I'd actually be also looking up the credibility practices of the FT itself and learning more about the source at the same time as I'm consuming that information from that website. So that could look like opening another tab on your browser and learning more about the site that you're reading on if you've never heard of it before, or looking it up on your phone or asking someone that you trust. NewsGuard's own nutrition label products are a great way to do this and kind of bring more context to your reading online as well. And finally, never being afraid to ask for help or ask questions. If you come across sources that you are suspicious about or you can't quite figure out, what is the motive of this? Is it from a place I should trust? It's always good to get clarification before sharing things like this with family and friends. Now, quickly moving on to NewsGuard and what we do to fight misinformation online. So we are essentially an anti-misinformation company that's run on human intelligence. So you may see right now there's a lot happening with AI and automation. And while we think there is a place for all of that, the nature of misinformation and how quickly it moves means that we see a lot of value in applying human intelligence and unbiased research to actually understanding source credibility. And we do this in 2 ways, one of which is actually providing ratings for the credibility of news and information websites. I'm assuming most of you are based in Canada or North America or across Europe, perhaps, but the markets that we cover are the US, the UK, Italy, France, Germany, Canada, Austria, and soon Australia and New Zealand. And what we're really trying to do here is function like the opposite of an algorithm. So algorithms are black boxes. If you type something to an algorithm and it spits something out, you can't go back and ask the algorithm, why did you do that? Or why did you say that? NewsGuard is really trying to focus on being transparent and accountable by conducting all of our work with trained journalists and keeping our door open so you can see exactly how we do the work that we do, show our working, ask any questions you may have, and dig more into our processes so you can make your own decisions. Essentially, our mission is to equip citizens of all ages and backgrounds with the skills and tools they need to assess the credibility of information online and avoid misinformation. And the important thing here is we're putting the power back in your hands. So NewsGuard will never say, you definitely should be reading these news sources, or definitely don't believe anything that this publication says. What we do is we research sites, we show our working, and we leave it up to you to say, okay, with this added context, is this a website that I want to be sharing with family and friends? Is this something I choose to believe? Does this website, align with my values? And does it represent the type of kind of good journalism or good reporting that I look for in my other news sources that I enjoy reading? So here's a screenshot of what our browser extension looks like in action. This is on a Facebook feed. You guys might see this is familiar, the format screenshotted from the news feed on Facebook. And you can see the little 100% next to the URL of the news website. This is because I've got the NewsGuard browser extension downloaded. And what I can do here is when I come across a news website on Facebook, hover over that extension, and this little window pops up. So here you see there's a description of the name of the website, a short description of what it is in case you've never come across it before, a score out of 100, and then a short description of whether or not it is a credible news outlet. And then following that is a detailed description of our 9 credibility and transparency criteria, which we'll delve into as well. Importantly, what you can then do is click through to click see the full nutrition label. And I've screenshotted a nutrition label here on the right-hand side. So you can see our criteria are things like, does this website repeatedly publish false content? Does it regularly correct its errors? So if it publishes a mistake, is it transparent and forthcoming about correcting those mistakes so people aren't continually confused? Does it label its advertising? So when you're seeing pictures and brands mentioned on websites, are they being really clear about when these brands are actually paying to be on the website and when they are part of reporting? Does the website reveal who's in charge? Who is funding these websites? And what interests do they have in the content the website produces? Whether or not they're forthcoming about that can often make the difference between a site that is transparent and wants to provide helpful news and trustworthy information, and a site that actually just exists to push forward a specific ideology. But we're not just giving you that scorecard as you see on the right-hand side, in this case for a website called GalDem, which scores 92.5 out of 100. We're not just giving you that and saying, right, you've got to believe that and trust what we say, and that's that. What we actually do is write what we call a nutrition label, which is what you see on the left-hand side. Obviously, I could only include a small portion of this, but if you imagine scrolling down, the nutrition label will go on for much longer. And what we're doing here is really showing our work. So much like the way the government can't stop you from eating a chocolate bar, what they can do is say, here's the information about exactly what you're putting into your body, and you can decide from that based on that whether or not you think it's healthy or good for you. And we're trying to do the same thing with news. So when you come across a news site that you are unfamiliar with, reading NewsGuard's nutrition label is often a way for you to get familiar with the credibility and reliability practices of that site, and then decide for yourself, does this evidence look to me like something that is worth my trust? And should I believe what I see on this website? Or actually, does this feel a little too dubious for my liking? And actually, I'm not 100% sure that I can trust what I'm reading on this website based on its editorial practices. So every single website we rate comes with this nutrition label. It's conducted by our trained journalists and analysts. Everyone who works at NewsGuard signs a really strict code of ethics policy, which ensures no one brings their own politics into things. Our 2 co-CEOs, for example, are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. So they may not agree on much, but they definitely do inform the deeply sort of centrist approach that we take. I know as well from my experience working here that we get equal backlash from people on the left and on the right, which, is never fun to deal with, but at least shows me that we're doing something right. So as you can see here, each website gets an overall trust score out of 100 based on these 9 weighted criteria, and everything is backed up by a nutrition label so you can decide and make your own decisions. As I mentioned, we are completely transparent about what we do, but a couple other things to highlight. We always reach out to websites to get comment from them. So we're never publishing these nutrition labels as a way to scare people or surprise them. We're actually always reaching out to websites that we write a rating for and ensuring they get the chance to comment. So if we're saying, hey, we noticed that on your about page, there's no information about who actually funds this operation, where you're getting money from, who's invested in your business. We're giving them a chance to clarify that and report back to us. And we always include evidence of those exchanges in the nutrition label. So those are there for you to see as well. We also similarly post complaints from publishers about anything we've written about them to maintain balance. So if we're rating a site poorly on practices and they come back and they say they disagree for whatever reason, we will also include that information so you get the full picture of exactly the work that we're doing. We don't accept fees from news websites that we rate. NewsGuard makes money by licensing all of the information, the thousands of nutrition labels I just showed you, to larger companies, larger tech companies, brands, advertising agencies to help them decide which news to support with their advertising and which news they want to stay away from. So that's how we make money. We're not making money through the people that we're rating, and we will never accept payment from a certain site to rate them favorably or improve their score. So again, what we're really here to do is give you the tools you need to make your own decisions. And source credibility, as I mentioned, is only one of many tools and approaches that you can use when keeping yourself safe online. So one of those things is to conduct lateral reading, making sure that when you're looking at news sources online, you're also conducting research if the source is something you've never come across before. It also means not believing every sensationalist headline you read and taking a bit of time to pause, check it with a friend or someone trusted, or using NewsGuard's sort of third-party descriptions to help you make your own decision about whether or not this is something you want to share with family and friends. So just to summarize super quickly, we see our browser extension tool, which works on search engines as well as social media platforms. So if you type something into Google and you have access to NewsGuard, all of the search results will come up with those little blue shields that you saw earlier. And we're really here to support you in answering your questions about source credibility using our ratings. We're here for you to get in touch with us because everyone who accesses NewsGuard's ratings can access not just a faceless company, but the actual people and analysts who work on these problems. So if you've got any questions or clarifications, you've got someone to ask. You've got a real human being to contact. You're not just contacting an algorithm. And hopefully this is a tool that can expand your awareness and your ability to help people in your networks and communities be more safe online, limit the spread of misinformation, and make sure their news diet is a trustworthy and varied one. And there was a question about showing this live in real time, which I'm more than happy to do. I'll do that right now and share my screen so you can see how this works. So as you can see, I'm just on Google here. I've typed in CBC as was requested. And because I've got the NewsGuard browser extension downloaded, I see this hover over here. So it says CBC is the English language website of the CBC Radio Canada, blah, blah, blah. It gets 100 out of 100 because it adheres to all 9 standards of credibility and transparency. And then if I click to see the full nutrition label, which everyone with NewsGuard is able to do, I can scroll down and actually read and learn about the website's, the description of what it's about, its ownership and financing, the types of content it publishes, its credibility practices, its transparency practices, its history. And then here you can see the corrections that we issue. So this is an example of what I was discussing earlier. We always will correct our own errors just the way we expect other websites to do so. So we previously mistakenly referred to something and we've corrected that. And we've also included editor's notes when things are updated. And you can see exactly who's worked on these. You can even click on their profiles and then this takes you to NewsGuard's website and then you can see their contact details and the experience they have. So everything we do is super transparent. We also have a list of the sources that we've used in putting this nutrition label report together, so you can also check those out. Can you show a website that doesn't have a high percentage of credibility as an example? Sure. I mean, there are plenty. Where should I begin? An interesting one is one called Veterans Today. As you can see, it gets a low score of 22.5 out of 100, which is pretty bad. We rate websites we kind of try and assume the best intent until we discover otherwise. And so when you see a site with a low score, it definitely means that we found ample evidence for it being an offender and something that is potentially harmful with the frequency with which it publishes misinformation. So this website, veteranstoday.com, it sounds like a website about veterans, but actually we found is a highly opinionated pro-Russia site that we've found to frequently publish false information about a variety of topics. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, oftentimes repeat offenders like websites like Veterans Today will publish conspiracy theories about not only Ukraine and 9/11, but maybe also things like healthcare and COVID. And so again, you can see here that we were unable to determine the exact ownership of Veterans Today. We think we have, and so we've done our best here, and we've outlined the research that we found. And oftentimes, because we are faulting this website on so many of our criteria, including the most important ones up top, the ones that are most heavily weighted, we actually have much longer nutrition labels that you can read through that actually explain exactly why the website has failed on certain criteria. So this is an example of a site that, receives a pretty low score. And finally, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, NewsGuard is available through a partnership we are running with the UK government on media literacy projects for the elderly. You are able to download NewsGuard for your own browser, whether or not you use Firefox, Chrome, Safari. If you use Microsoft Edge, it's actually already free on Edge, which is a little easier. But these 3 instructions I'll leave up on the screen, which will give you free access to NewsGuard for 1 year. And you can try it out and see if you like it, and hope it brings more accountability to the way that you consume information online.